Welcome to the debate. Today, we are wrestling with, well, one of the most persistent and difficult tensions in Christian theology, and it's brought into really sharp relief by the readings for the fifth Sunday of Ordinary Time. We're analyzing the commentaries of biblical scholar Marie-Noëlle Tabout, as curated by Thierry Jallis, and, frankly, the material forces a confrontation.
It certainly forces a choice. Yeah, we're looking at a collection of texts, Isaiah, Psalm 112, St. Paul to the Corinthians, and Matthew's Gospel, that seem to pull the believer in two completely opposite directions. I mean, it's a real tug-of-war between being seen and, well, being hidden.
And that is the central question we are debating today, the nature of religious influence. On one side, you have this city on a hill, the mandate for a visible, robust, and socially active faith that validates itself by breaking chains and enacting justice.
And on the other, you have the call to be salt. Salt that works by dissolving, salt that works through what Paul calls weakness and trembling. So my position today is that Tabout's analysis points us definitively toward a reflection model of faith. We are not the source of the light. We are merely, and ideally, invisibly reflecting it.
Where I am arguing for liberation. My reading of Tabout, particularly in her treatment of Isaiah and Matthew, is that faith is functionally dead without tangible, visible, material transformation. If the yoke isn't broken, the light just isn't on.
That is it's a dangerous proposition that risks turning theology into sociology. But I am ready to hear your case.
All right, so let's start where the liturgy starts, Isaiah 58. We need to set the scene because context is everything here. Tabout notes we are in the 6th century BC. The exile is over. The Jews are back in Jerusalem. The temple is running. The liturgy is restored. By all religious metrics, this should be, a golden age of piety.
They are certainly checking all the boxes. Tabout notes they're fasting, they are praying, they are seeking God day after day, as the text says.
And yet, God is furious. I mean, this isn't just a mild critique or a suggestion for improvement. It's an outright rejection. Tabout highlights the devastating irony. The people are fasting to please God, but at the same time, they are brawling, they are chasing profit, and they are brutalizing their workers. The text says, you fast while striking with a wicked fist.
Right. I don't dispute that the behavior was hypocritical. You can't simulate piety while acting with cruelty. That is a baseline expectation.
But it goes deeper than just don't be a hypocrite. Tabout points out that God redefines the very concept of a fast. The true fast that God chooses isn't about food deprivation or spiritual introspection or wearing sackcloth. Listen to the list Tabout highlights. Share your bread with the hungry, shelter the homeless poor, clothe the naked. These are economic acts.
They are acts of charity, yes.
They are acts of justice. Thierry Jallis, in his curation of this material, actually highlights the passages regarding liberty in red text on his blog. He quotes Tabout saying something that acts as the cornerstone of my argument. If we do not find a liberating word in the texts, it is because we have not understood them. If your theology isn't freeing people from material bondage, you haven't understood Isaiah. My point is that the light promised in Scripture is entirely conditional on this activism.
I see why you think that, but let me offer a different perspective. You're focusing entirely on the output, but you are ignoring the source of that output. You're arguing for a faith that, validates itself through visible results. But if you turn to the second reading, St. Paul's letter to the Corinthians, Tabout exposes a completely different dynamic regarding how truth is transmitted.
Paul is writing to a Greek audience. He's just adapting his rhetorical style to be less abrasive.
No, I believe he is defining the nature of the gospel itself. Paul writes, I did not come to you with a prestige of language or wisdom. Now, Theb digs into the etymology here in a way that is absolutely critical, and we should spend a moment on this. She points out that the word convince, in French convaincre, contains the root vaincre.
Which means?
To conquer.
Exactly. It means to defeat. Tabout argues that a religion of love cannot be about conquering. It cannot be about winning an argument or dazzling people with the prestige of our intellect or, for that matter, our good works. If you adopt the city on a hill mentality, this robust, visible social warrior stance you're advocating for, You are essentially trying to conquer the world with your righteousness. I hardly think feeding the poor or stopping oppression is conquering in a negative sense. It's conquering evil.
But it can so easily become about the conqueror, not the liberated. Paul says he presented himself in weakness and fear and much trembling. Why? That is clear, so that the Corinthians' faith would rest on the power of God, not on human wisdom. If we become too impressive, too effective, too visible, we risk making the faith about our efficacy. The Juarez warns us using the salt metaphor. Too much salt denatures the food. The vocation of salt is to vanish. If you can see the salt on your steak, you've ruined the steak.
But if there is no salt, the steak is inedible. And if there is no light, the city is in darkness. You're setting up a dichotomy that the texts are trying to bridge. But let's look at that bridge. I want to talk about Psalm 112, because Thabit spends a significant amount of time here, and I think her analysis actually dismantles your passive argument.
It's an alphabetical psalm, isn't it? An acrostic.
Exactly. It covers the life of the just man from A to Z. And how does it define him? Now, you might latch onto the opening line, "Happy the man who fears the Lord." You'll say this implies a passive, internal stance of reverence.
Well, words matter, and Thabit is very specific about the fear of the Lord. She defines it not as terror, but as filial trust. She says it is loving his will completely. It is an internal disposition of reliance. The just man starts with an internal reality, trusting that God the Father knows what is best. The external actions, they flow from that internal posture. If you skip the fear, this filial obedience, you are just a social worker, not a just man in the biblical sense.
That is a convenient reading for someone who wants to stay in the pew, safe in their trust. But look at the translation Thabit cites from Andrei Shiraki. This is a brilliant insight that shifts the whole paradigm. Shiraki translates the word happy or blessed, eru, as en marche.
Moving forward.
Walking. On the move. Happiness in the biblical sense isn't a static state of sitting in a room feeling filial trust. It is dynamic movement. It is walking on the road of the alliance. Thabit explicitly points out that this just man shares and gives to the poor. It is kinetic.
But where is he walking to? That's the real question.
He is walking toward the image of God. Thabit draws a direct parallel between the attributes of God and the attributes of this man. The psalm says God is justice, tenderness, and pity. And then it says the man is justice, tenderness, and pity. The man becomes the image of God through the act of giving.
But there is a grammatical distinction Thabit makes that you are glossing over, and it destroys the idea that the man is the source of these virtues.
Which distinction is that?
The genitive case, Thabit notes that while God is justice, the man is of justice. It's a relationship of derivation. The man possesses these qualities only as a reflection, not as an inherent property. He is like the moon reflecting the sun. If the moon starts thinking it's the source of the light because it's walking across the sky, we have a problem. It leads to pride.
But the moon is visible, and that brings us to the gospel, where this tension between visibility and hiddenness really just explodes. Matthew 5, "You are the light of the world. A city set on a mountain cannot be hidden." The but is categorical here. A lamp is not lit to be put under a bushel.
I grant you, the image is powerful.
It's not just powerful, it's a command. She writes, "Good works must be seen so that others glorify the Father." If the church or the believer decides to retreat into a hidden spirituality, into your weakness and trembling, because they are afraid of looking like they are conquering, they are failing the mission. Thabit says, if the lamp doesn't light well, we won't see that it is pretty. The function is illumination. You cannot illuminate a room by hiding in the walls.
That's a compelling argument for a marketing campaign, but it ignores the fundamental paradox of Christianity, the cross. Thabit brings this up in her analysis of Paul, and it is the checkmate to your city on a hill logic.
Checkmate is a strong word.
Consider the Messiah crucified. To the human mind, to the wisdom of men, the cross is a total failure. It is weakness. It is defeat. It is the opposite of a shining city.
Babbitt reminds us that Deuteronomy actually cursed anyone hung on a tree. It is a scandal.
It is a scandal, yes. But it is also the mechanism of salvation.
Precisely, but it is a mechanism that defies human logic. If we prioritize visibility and impressive works, we align ourselves with human wisdom, the very thing Paul says is incompatible with God. Babbitt suggests that our poverty of language and our trembling are exactly what allow the Spirit to work. If we are too bright, too loud, too effective, we obscure the mystery of God. She explicitly says, "A light too strong crushes what it wants to illuminate." Have you never been blinded by someone's self-righteous charity? I have. But I have also seen people starve because religious people were too busy trembling to organize a food drive. Sabat writes a line that I find incredibly practical, and I want to hear how you deal with it. She says, "The food exists before the salt, the world exists before the light."
That's a beautiful line. How do you interpret it?
I interpret it as a mandate for intervention. Food without salt is bland. A world without light is pitch black. We are essential additives. The world is fundamentally less without our active intervention. Sabat says, you become salt and light by the very fact of receiving his words. It's an ontological change that demands engagement. We add the flavor that makes existence bearable.
See, I read, "The food exists before the salt" as a call to radical humility. The world is already there. The food is already there. God created it. We are secondary. We are not the main course. We are there to bring out the flavor of what God has already created in humanity. The bot says, evangelizing is saying the kingdom is already in your midst. It is revealing what is there, not manufacturing something new. But how is it revealed? This is the crux of it. We need to talk about human efficacy versus divine reflection. I want to go back to Isaiah because the causal link there is undeniable. The text says, "If you remove the yoke, then your light will rise."
Then?
Yes, then. Action precedes manifestation. The bot uses a fascinating metaphor here. She says our attitude toward others is the thermometer of our attitude toward God. Sorry, but I just don't buy that entirely. There is a real theological danger there. The bot includes a reference in the source material to Lumen Gentium from Vatican II. It states clearly, the true light is not us, it is Jesus Christ.
Agreed. No one is saying we are the Messiah.
But if we focus too much on our action, on our breaking of yokes, we inevitably start thinking we are the source. Foppet warns that human wisdom is reason, persuasion, force, power. She contrasts this with the mystery of God. If we make the faith about our social efficacy, we are operating in the realm of human wisdom. We become activists who happen to go to church rather than revealers of the Father. We become the light rather than the window.
But Thabit also says the man is made to be the image of God. How can we be the image of a God who hears the cry of the poor if we do not also hear it and act? Thabit says clearly, God is the liberator. What is asked of Israel is to make the same gestures in turn. We are commanded to mimic the liberation.
Mimic, yes, but the mode matters. This is where I think you miss the nuance of the salt metaphor in Matthew. Thabit ties the gospel of the salt immediately to the Beatitudes which preceded.
She does. She suggests they illuminate each other.
Exactly. She says being salt of the earth is accepting to live according to values of humility, gentleness, purity, and she adds this kicker, accepting to be poor and destitute. You cannot be a city on a hill in the way you described, powerful and robust, if you are poor and destitute.
I would argue that the city on a hill is made of the poor and destitute. That is its power. It stands in contrast to the cities of empire. It's a city where the wicked fist of Isaiah is replaced by the open hand. It is visible specifically because it operates differently.
That is an interesting synthesis. But consider Paul again. Thabut says, the Messiah poor cannot be announced by means of power. You cannot fight for the poor using the weapons of the rich, and prestige, rhetorical power, and visible success are the weapons of the rich. The salt must risk being dissolved. It must be willing to be invisible. If the salt stays in a pile on the side of the plate so everyone can admire it, it fails its purpose. It must die to itself to give flavor.
I see the spiritual depth of that, truly. But I worry it gives us an excuse to be passive. Thabut asks the haunting question in her commentary. How will men believe in God's project of love so long as we do not multiply gestures of solidarity? That keeps me up at night. If we are just trembling in the corner, trusting in our filial fear, while the world starves, we are not salt. We are just rocks.
And if we are running around frantic, conquering social ills but losing our connection to the mystery of God, we are just noisy gongs.
Thabit says, it suffices to love, but one must truly love. And love, she notes, cannot be reasoned, cannot be demonstrated. It is a presence.
A presence that feeds people.
A presence that feeds people, yes. But it feeds them because it loves them, not because it needs to prove it is the light. It's a subtle distinction, but the entire commentary really hinges on it.
I suppose that brings us to a conclusion. I still maintain that Thabit and Jallis are calling us to a faith that changes material conditions. The text of Isaiah is too specific to ignore. Share your bread, house the poor. To be light is to be a visible sign of God's project of peace and justice. If the light isn't visible, if the yoke isn't broken, the theology has failed. And I maintain that while the action is necessary, the posture is everything. Paul's weakness is the only safety mechanism we have against our own ego. We must be salt that is willing to disappear into the dough. We must rely on the Spirit to convince, remembering convince, because our own wisdom is insufficient. As the BUP says, the Holy Spirit is a better preacher than we are.
I think we can both agree on Thabit's unifying thought, which you alluded to earlier. Evangelization is not a conquest. It is a presence of love.
Yes. Whether that presence is the shouting of Isaiah's justice or the trembling of Paul's preaching, the goal is the same, to reveal the flavor of a life lived in alliance with God.
It's a challenge to find that balance, to be the light that shines without blinding, and the salt that flavors without overpowering.
And to remember that the light isn't us, it's just reflecting off of us.
Thank you for joining us on The Debate. We invite you to read the source material from Marie-Noelle Thabut and Thierry Jallis and decide for yourself, are you called to be the visible city or the hidden salt?
Farewell.